at bbcworldservice.com BBC OS Conversations.
Turkey is in the grip of its biggest street protests in more than a decade after the arrest of the mayor of Istanbul. We hear from some of those taking part and from journalists who have seen a clampdown on free speech, something I experienced as well, detained by Turkish police and deported for covering the demonstrations.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Hello and welcome to the History Hour with me, Max Pearson, the past brought to life by those who were there. Coming up, a rare, peaceful handover of power in Nigeria.
And in the interest of unity, stability and progress of our dear country, he has decided to concede defeat.
Also, the 2015 Germanwings air disaster.
It was almost impossible to think that a plane of more than 60 tons and 40 meters long disappear and crash in this mountain.
Plus, the suspicious death of an officer during the breakup of Yugoslavia in 1991, and the only artist granted a sitting to paint one of the most famous figures of the 20th century.
But Nelson Mandela, when I went to see him on one occasion, Zelda, his secretary, said, "Oh, Mr. Riley's here. You remember Mr. Riley?" He said, "Oh, yes. Does he remember me, do you think?"
First, today's news.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. The United States has said it expects all parties in Gaza to comply with international humanitarian law following the killing by Israel of 15 paramedics, civil defense workers, and a UN worker. But the State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce added that every single thing that happens in Gaza is happening because of Hamas. Our correspondent Tom Bateman raised the issue with her at a press conference.
I went on to press her about the issue of the State Department's own processes, because remember, the US is Israel's biggest supplier of arms. Under American law, US weapons can't be supplied to foreign militaries if they suspect they could be used for gross violations of human rights. And there are internally processes within the State Department that tend to look at incidents that they might be concerned about for that reason. And I pressed her, not for the first time, on an incident in Gaza, but she simply wouldn't go there, wouldn't answer that question.
The French far-right leader Marine Le Pen has condemned as a political decision her conviction for embezzlement, which means she won't be allowed to run in the presidential election in 2 years. She says she's innocent and will appeal.
There are millions of
French people who are indignant to an unimaginable extent when they see that in France, the country of human rights, judges have put in place practices which we thought were reserved for authoritarian regimes.
Ms. Le Pen has been sentenced to 4 years in prison, half of it suspended, for diverting European parliamentary allowances for her own party's use. A woman who accused Prince Andrew of sexually assaulting her when she was 17 says she's been involved in a serious accident and is in hospital. Virginia Giuffre said she had suffered kidney failure after a collision with a school bus. Here's Neda Tawfiq.
Virginia Giuffre is covered in bruises and in a hospital bed in a photo posted on her social media. She wrote that doctors had given her 4 days to live and were transferring her to a specialist. It's unclear where and when the collision with a school bus happened. Responding to the BBC, her spokesperson confirmed she was receiving medical care in the hospital and said Ms. Giuffre greatly appreciated the well wishes people were sending. Her sex abuse allegations against Prince Andrew led the royal to step down from public duties and to reach a private settlement with her. He has strongly denied her claims.
The United States has sought to defend itself over the pace of its deployment of earthquake emergency aid to Myanmar, following the Trump administration's announcement last week that it was dismantling USAID, America's main overseas aid agency. The State Department said a team was on its way and had set aside $2 million for aid organizations. World News from the BBC. The United States says it's deported another group of alleged gang members to El Salvador. It said the 17 men were from Venezuela and Central America. They've been sent to a notorious Salvadorian high-security prison where they're expected to be held for at least a year. Nicaragua has suspended authorization for the former president of Panama, Ricardo Martinelli, to enter the country, despite granting him asylum on humanitarian grounds. The announcement came as he was about to leave the Nicaraguan embassy and fly to the capital, Managua, on a private plane. President Rosario Murillo said Nicaragua wasn't willing to enter an international dispute. Mr. Martinelli was sentenced to prison for corruption a year ago and banned from running in the presidential election. A major incident's been declared in the English city of Birmingham over a continuing strike by rubbish collectors that's left 17,000 tons of waste on the streets. Workers walked out in early March in a row over pay and job losses. Residents have described mountains of rubbish. The two NASA astronauts who were stuck in space for more than 9 months say they felt humbled by the support they received. Nearly 2 weeks after they returned to Earth, Sonny Williams and Butch Wilmore have spoken publicly for the first time. They were meant to stay on the International Space Station for just 8 days. Butch Wilmore said that it was important to learn from the process.
All the way up and down the chain, we all are responsible. So we're not going to look back and say this happened or that happened and that person or that issue or that entity's to blame. We're going to look forward and say, what are we going to use our lessons learned from this whole process and make sure that we are successful in the future.
Butch Wilmore, BBC World News.
This is Radio 2.
On BBC Sounds.
And on your smart speaker. Play BBC Radio 2.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. The United States has said it expects all parties in Gaza to comply with international humanitarian law following the killing by Israeli forces of 15 paramedics, civil defense workers and a UN employee.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
The voice of the UK.
This is our wee part of the United Kingdom, and I see no reason why we should smash it up.
When you're working on it and you're part of it and when you're in it, it's more about bringing people together.
Wherever you are in the UK tonight, you're part of this with us on this network.
I think it's absolutely the biggest single issue in Scotland at the moment.
We need somebody to look after our economy, make sure we get enough money in Wales.
It's definitely a change in the area. It's growing.
It is challenging for everybody.
None of us are getting what we asked for. What are they doing?
Does it affect me directly? Does it really?
BBC Radio 5 Live.
Call free 08085 909 693. Text 85058. Text will be charged at your standard message rate. Message on WhatsApp 08085 909 693. Visit bbc.co.uk/5live terms for our terms of use and privacy notice.
Hello, I'm Neil Nunes with the BBC News. The United States has said it expects all parties in Gaza to comply with international humanitarian law following the killing by Israeli forces of 15 paramedics, civil defense workers and a UN employee.
You're listening to BBC Radio 4 on BBC Sounds, on FM, on DAB digital radio and on your smart speaker. Play BBC Radio 4.
BBC News at 5 o'clock. This is Tom Sandars. A minute's silence will be held in Myanmar later to remember those who died in Friday's devastating earthquake.
But now, let's get the latest news.
This is Radio 2
on BBC Sounds
and on your smart speaker.
Play BBC Radio 2.
BBC News at 5 o'clock. This is Tom Sandars.
The voice of the UK.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
BBC News at 5 o'clock. This is Tom Sandars.